Okay, I hope we've started recording. Alyssa, can you see that we're recording? I just want to make sure I'm doing this correctly.
Yeah, so yeah, we're recording.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll get started. I'm so sorry. Okay, so everybody, welcome to this webinar on U.S. university admissions during COVID-19. Over the summer, we've been working on trying to sort of capture all of the changes that's been happening to the application process this year. Because we understand that it's very confusing. It was very confusing to us as well. So we imagine that having a webinar where we go through all of these changes will be, where would be really helpful for a lot of you. There is a document with all of the things that we talk about today that's available on the Project Access Academy on the website. And we'll put a link to that up as well so you can easily access it after the webinar. So before we get started on what we'll cover today, we'll just do a short introduction to our two panelists today. Me, my name is Nina. I'm originally from Denmark. I finished my BA from Columbia last year, where I studied political science and French. In the past year, I've been at Oxford University studying criminology, and however, I've been back in Denmark for the past many months because of COVID. So we'll see what next year has in store for me. So Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hey again, everyone. My name is Alyssa. Originally, I'm from Moscow, Russia, and currently I'm a student in the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. I'm a rising sophomore, and I joined Project Access quite recently.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so what we'll cover today is first we'll go through just an overview of some of the implications of COVID on admissions. So I'll talk shortly about some of like the requirements, interviews, extracurricular, that kind of stuff. Then we'll go over sort of like an overview of all the application requirements, talk about changes to standardized tests, subject test, English proficiency test, and then we'll sort of finish off talking a little bit about application deadlines, talking about the difference between early action, early decision, regular decision, and how that's a little bit different this year. And then we'll finish with a Q&A where you'll all get to ask questions about stuff we didn't cover. Great. Oh, there we go. Okay, so starting off, this year is a little bit crazy. Applying to the US is generally really exhausting and confusing to a lot of people, but this year is pretty special. So we understand, obviously, like one of the biggest changes has been to this standardized test requirement, where most schools have gone test optional. So we'll talk more about that when we get to the standardized test portion, but that's definitely the biggest one, and I think has been really confusing to people because I think a lot of you are probably considering, should I still do the test, should I not? So we'll get more into that, but that's definitely the biggest thing, but it's not the only one. I think we all have to understand that universities are also struggling with this and have been a little bit shy with like coming out with their decisions. But I think the things we'll be talking about today and what's in the document that we'll share with you are probably like, that's going to be like the end of it. I don't think we'll see any other major changes. So I think you can sort of like look at that and say, okay, that's how it's going to be. So if a university says that they're test optional, or if they're not test optional, that's what's going to be this year, because it would be very weird for them to change their minds like at the last minute. In terms of some other things that are different this year, obviously like interviews and campus visits are going to be online. So for a lot of people who are considering different universities. A lot of, like, usually you will visit the university if you can do that, maybe not as much as an international student. But this makes it maybe a little bit more difficult for you to choose the universities that you are going to apply to, or even pick the university once you get accepted. Lots of universities have changed their online offerings, so be sure to go and visit the website and talk to other people who went to the school or are still students there, and see if you can hopefully like make a decision from that. The next thing is the essay portion. I think a lot of people will maybe want to talk about how COVID had like an impact on you, but I would say like try not to do that, because a lot of people will, and you want to stand out in the application. So like unless it had a major like significant impact on your life, I would maybe choose something else. In terms of extracurriculars, obviously a lot of things have been canceled this year. And I think we also did a webinar on this earlier this summer about what other things that you could do. But really consider, like, if your things have been canceled, if you haven't been able to go to that meet or create that art project in school, try to do something else. Try to see if you can impact your community in some way, and write about that in your application instead. In terms of like the next couple of years and then the next 5 years, a lot of schools have been considering, even before COVID, whether or not they were going to take off the standardized test requirements. I think it was fairly recently that the whole UC system, which are all the University of California schools, have come out saying that they want to scrap using the SAT and the ACT as requirements and make their own test. And we've even seen other schools making it optional in the past couple of years. So I think that's going to be, we're going to see that speeding up in the next years because of this. So if you're applying in the next cycle or in the cycle after that, be sure to look into that so you always know what the requirements are. Okay, so that was a bit of an overview. Let's skip to some of the application requirements. So just to go through all of the requirements, so we know that that you are aware of all the things that you need to do. So the application portal, this is basically where you put together your whole application, and this portal can be the university's own portal. It could be the Common App or the Coalition app, and sometimes there's even a fourth one. But just be sure that you know which portal you can use, because not all universities use the Common App or the Coalition app. So in this portal, you'll put in like all your personal information, your extracurriculars, honors, summer activities. You'll put your essays and recommendations, basically like where you put all of your stuff, and make sure that that's completely filled out. So then next there's a personal essay, and this could, for example, be one of the 7 prompts that the Common App has come out with, and you'll need to write an essay about that, and that needs to be put into the portal as well. Just be sure that you know that if you're using different portals, it's going to be different questions. So don't think that you can write the Common App essay and then submit that through the Coalition app if you're also using that for another school. Really important. Then for the then we have the standardized test, and that could be either the SAT or the ACT, and we'll go more into that later. Then you have the English proficiency test, which is usually the TOEFL, the IELTS. It could be something I think called PTE, or the Duolingo test, and sometimes the Cambridge test as well. And we'll go more into these tests and what the schools require, but that's something for international students particularly to be aware of. Then next we have the supplemental essays. So usually each school will have their own essay portions where you, for example, answer questions such as, why do you want to go to Yale? Or tell me about a time where you faced a big challenge, and how did you solve that? And usually those essays are much shorter, so they can be 100 words or 250 words. And they can be anywhere from like 2 essays to 10. I think Yale this year has a lot of essays, just so you know. Next, we have the transcripts. So that's all your transcripts from high school that needs to be sent, usually directly from your high school. Sometimes you can also upload them yourself and then send original copies later. Next, we have letters of recommendations. I think that varies also between like 2 and 3. Sometimes you can even add an additional one. Be sure to ask your teachers well in advance so they have time and you have time to talk to them about what to put in there. The next one I think is one thing that people are really confused about sometimes, which is the counselor recommendation. So if you're a student in the United States, you usually have a counselor at your high school that knows you really well, unless it's a really big school, obviously. And that person kind of like talks to your character and your overall academics, where your teacher will likely more talk about that specific subject. So if you're an international student and you don't have a counselor, what I've usually told people is that if you can get your principal of your school to write that recommendation, that would be great. And if you have some sort of influence on what to put in that, that would obviously like be the best option for you. Last thing is the application fee that you'll need to submit to the school. I think this is about $75 or $80. It might have changed since I applied. Usually international students can't request a waiver, but I know that some schools will allow you to. So if you're applying to a lot of schools and that's going to be a financial impediment for you, you can certainly try to get a waiver for that. Then I say optional other here because sometimes in an application you can submit like art supplements or videos or something about what you like, other things that you've done. So I saw someone who's really into singing, so she submitted a video of her performances. So if you want to add something extra to your application, that's a place where you can do that. And the last thing is this mid-year report. Sometimes the universities will ask you to have your counselor and your teachers like submit this mid-year report. So in the States where you get grades every quarter or every semester, it's just for them to see that you're keeping up your grades. For international students, this might mean that you need to have your teachers sort of predict your grades if you only get grades once a year. But it's just for the schools to see that you're keeping up the good work. Alyssa, is there anything that I have not covered here that you want to add?
I just put it in the chat. I think as for the counselor, if you don't have one, you can actually ask your program coordinator. That's what I did. I completed the International Baccalaureate program in high school, and I asked my program coordinator. Yeah, and for the mid-year report, that's it, as Nina said. Also, I might add that this was my case. The university emailed my coordinator, like specifically to ask like how were my academic successes, whether I was keeping up with my grades in the transcript. So also keep in mind that the university might like choose to specifically mail your counselor, coordinator, teacher to get some additional information.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to this standardized test, which is what has changed quite dramatically this year. So what is the standardized test requirement? Well, it's usually the SAT or the ACT. There are some schools that have their own, but I don't think that's like, I don't think that is any of the Ivy Leagues or any of the top schools at this point. But it's basically like a test where you are tested on things like science, writing, math, critical thinking. And the schools use these tests to sort of like compare you to other students, and it's usually really important for international students to submit this test because it's a way for us to sort of show the school that we are on par with American students. American students usually spend years of prep on this. So unless that you come from, I think, like an international educational system or like the IB, or if you have gone to an American high school, you haven't been told years and years in advance that this is a test you need to take. So this can be quite stressful for people. But it is a great way for you to show that you are capable of all the same things as a regular US student. So in a regular cycle, most of the schools do require that you take the SATs. I think the only two schools at this point that make it optional are NYU and U Chicago, like of the top 30 schools. So it is probably not something that you can avoid taking in a regular cycle. However, in this cycle, things have changed quite a bit. There are all the schools on the list that you'll see in the document are all test optional. And what that means is that you are not required to send in your test scores. If you, however, have already taken the test and you think that you did well and you want to submit the scores, you can certainly do that. A lot of the schools, and we'll talk about that, which is like score choice and super scoring. If you have taken the test multiple times, you can even send in all of those. Be aware of how the different schools, like whether they super score or they allow you to like score choice, but that means that you can send in all of them and they'll still be considered. So there are only a couple of schools that won't even look at standardized tests this year, and you can find those on the list. However, if you have taken the test, most will likely consider them despite them being optional. So the question is, like, should you still take the test? I think if you haven't started studying yet, it might be a little bit of an issue, but I think you still have time, especially if you're applying regular decision. The recommendation from Project Access is that if you are not significantly disadvantaged in studying and taking the test, then you should still do it. And why do we say that? Well, because if you take the test and you don't do well, you actually don't have to submit the scores. I haven't found one school that actually says you're required to submit the test if you took them. So if you take the test and you don't do well and you're like, I don't really want the school to see this score, just don't submit them. And you should be perfectly fine. It's just, as I said earlier, it's a great way for international students to show that you can do the same things and make you stand out. So yeah, so when should I take the test? I think the dates vary a little bit from country to country, but there should be at least like 2 or 3 times in the fall that you can take it. Some schools even allow you to take the test after the deadline and then submit it later to be considered. But again, that varies greatly across schools, so just make sure that you know if you need to have the score submitted before or if you can do it a little later. How you submit your scores. So most schools will let you what's called like self-report, because usually it costs money for if you want your score to be submitted officially through College Board if you took the SATs. But schools will allow you to self-report, for example, on the Common App, and then if you get accepted, you will just need to submit the official scores afterwards. So just a few words on this like score choice and super scoring. So score choice is that, let's say you've taken the test 3 times and you did really well on number 2. So then you can choose to just submit that one score. Super scoring, on the other hand, is if you've taken the test 2 or 3 times it will take individual sections and then put that together into one score. So if you did really well in writing in test number 1 and really well in math on test number 3, then you can sort of put those together to like one super score, and then submit that to the school. Anything I have missed, Alyssa, that you want to say about standardized tests?
I think you've covered it all. The only thing I would add is, so when you send the tests, let's say you apply early action and the deadline is November 1st, and your scores will arrive to the university on like November 14th. So some colleges allow you to do that, but in this situation, you kind of already notify the university that you will be sending your scores, which means no matter what your score is, it automatically goes to the university, which is a bit risky, but like, again, that's your own choice. And as for score choice, again, as Nina said, some colleges allow you to, some allow you to do super scoring, while some colleges actually might ask you to submit your entire score history, which means you have to submit all of your tests. However, my advice on that is don't stress out. Even if you have the option to choose your high score in one sitting, you might still choose to submit all of the scores to show your progress. So again, as you're international, you haven't spent, as most of you are international, you haven't spent your last 3 years of high school preparing for SAT or ACT, and the college admissions, they understand that, which means they will not only look at your final score, but also at your progress. Like, let's say you got 1,300, then you got like 1,400, and then you got like 1,450. So this is actually an amazing progress. So if you're in such a situation, I would actually suggest that you think about submitting all of your scores.
Great, thank you, great advice. So next we'll cover these like SAT subject tests a little bit. So the subject tests are a lot like the standardized test, where you get questions that vary quite a bit, but they are in a specific subject. So some schools will ask you to submit like 1, 2, or 3 subject tests. Sometimes they'll even ask you to do it in a specific subject. So for example, if you're applying to MIT, I think they really like that you submit some within the sciences or math. But these subjects can vary from like languages like French, German, Spanish, can also be world literature or government or anything like that. And I think that each test is around an hour, and it's all multiple choice. I might be wrong because I think it changed a little bit since I applied, but Alyssa can probably say a bit more about that. So in a regular cycle, this is always like a little confusing to people because each school has their own sort of requirements. So some schools will either highly recommend that you take the test, some will require them, and some are kind of indifferent. So in a regular cycle, for example, like Columbia and Princeton say that they're optional, while Harvard will write on their website that they strongly recommend that you do 2 subject tests along with taking a regular SAT or ACT. This year is a little bit different because all of the schools are basically test optional, and that also means for the subject test. So should you still take the subject test? I think if you're doing the SATs and you know that you are really strong in, for example, a language, and it's not going to be a huge burden for you, then sure, go ahead and take the test. If you're already very burdened with taking the SAT or the ACT, then maybe consider whether or not you will have time to properly study for a subject test. Since this cycle is test optional, I think the schools are going to be much more lenient about not submitting subject test when you submit an essay, like when you submit a standardized test along, because they know that people might have taken the SATs or the ACT earlier this year and then waiting to take the subject test later. So don't worry too much about that. The same thing about when should you take them for like standardized tests. There should be several dates, I think both in the fall and early next year, where you might be able to do it, but just be aware that that usually you can't take the subject test every time that you take the SATs or the ACT, if that makes sense. So the subject tests are only administered by the College Board because they are the SAT subject test. So it's not an ACT subject test. I hope that makes sense. So if you're taking the SATs, it's not even sure that they will be administering subject tests on the same day. I think I was a bit confusing there, but please ask me questions about this if I wasn't clear. So submitting scores, it's the same thing with the standardized test requirement. You can self-report and then send the scores in later. Alyssa, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, so I think that regarding the subject SAT tests, I think they were not actually administered the same. Also, I believe you can take only 3 SAT subject tests in one sitting, which means like in one day. And yes, as Nina said, they last 50 minutes each. Also, if you consider taking SSC subject tests, then ideally you should opt for those that are somehow related to your major. For example, if you're applying for engineering, you should choose Math 2 over Math 1 and Physics. Also, and you know them well, I suggest that you also try a subject SAT test in a language. Because lots of colleges actually have language requirements, which means you have to take like 4 semesters of a foreign language. And if you successfully perform your subject SAT test in a certain language, then you automatically opt out of this language requirement, which means you have like 4 kind of free courses. That's what I did for my school.
Cool. All right. Okay, so English proficiency test. So this is something that is usually a requirement for international students. Each school have sort of like their own rules about when you can opt out of it. So it could be that like the language that is spoken in the country is English, or if you conducted your whole high school in English, then you might be able to get a waiver for that. But usually it is a requirement for all international students. And the tests are basically looking into whether or not your English is at a level where the schools feel comfortable with you studying for a bachelor's degree solely in English. So the tests vary from, you probably heard the TOEFL, the IELTS, and the Cambridge one. Some that are not as, I think, well known is the Duolingo and the PTE. Some schools will allow you to submit those, but they're all testing your English language abilities. In a regular cycle, I think most universities require it, or they highly recommend that you submit one. However, in this cycle, it's a little different, but not completely. Even though that most schools have gone test optional, it's test optional for standardized tests, meaning the SAT and the ACT and the subject test. For the English proficiency test, or the English language requirement, it is still a requirement from a lot of schools. In terms of which test to take, so in the document that we made, you'll be able to see what kind of test each of the schools will allow you to do. The good thing about the Duolingo test is that it's one that you can take right in your own home. It's really affordable and accessible to a lot of people. However, not all schools will allow you to submit Duolingo. So I think I will always encourage people to take the TOEFL because it is the test that most schools will allow you to submit. So if you don't want to do multiple tests, or you know that all of the schools that you apply to will accept the TOEFL, do that one. If you know that all of your schools will allow you to submit Duolingo, that might be a better option for you because it is cheaper. And as I said, it's more accessible. You can take it right at home. Then do that. It's really up to you, but I would always encourage people to do the TOEFL just because it is the one that is most accepted. Alyssa, do you want to add anything to this English proficiency requirement or English language requirement? What did you do yourself? Can you hear me? Alyssa?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just asking, like, do you have anything to add? Like, what did you do about the language requirement?
As for the language requirement, I think you've covered it all. My only advice is that like English proficiency tests kind of proves your level of English language. So lots of students might think that as they've been studying in English in their school, or as they've been speaking English for a lot of time, they don't actually have to prepare for it. However, my advice is the following: just try to do 1 or 2 sample tests to get an idea of what the test looks like, what the structure is like, so you don't stress out during the test.
Great. Okay. Moving. Oh, what happened? Yeah. Moving on. Alyssa, do you wanna take over there?
Yeah, sure. So there are 3 different deadlines: the early decision, early action, and regular decision. So the most common one is the regular decision, which means you apply somewhere early January. However, for the University of California, the deadline is a bit different. But for other colleges, that's early January, and you receive your letter of decision early March. So all the colleges have this like standard application type. As for early decision, early action, as you can infer from the name, they happen earlier. Usually that's somewhere early November. And then you get your decision somewhere in the middle of December. So early action means that you just apply earlier and get your decision earlier. And that might be an advantage for those of you who are in difficult financial situation. So for example, you apply early, you get accepted in the middle of December, so you don't actually have to pay the application fees to other colleges to apply. However, please keep in mind that some colleges have the application type that's called single choice early action, which means you can apply early action only to one college. And as for early decision, you also apply early November and receive your decision letter middle of December. However, early decision is binding. You can apply only to one school, and if you're accepted, you must attend the university. The only reason you can reject their offer of admission is if they cannot provide you with enough financial aid for you to study this school.
Cool. So just a quick overview of application deadlines. If you're applying early, it's usually in the beginning of November. Regular decision, early January. There are slight changes to this, and be aware that there are different deadlines depending on what you are submitting. So this sounds a bit weird, but for example, Stanford has a deadline of October 15th if you're for early, if you're applying with an art supplement. So if you want to submit some sort of portfolio or a video, you actually have to apply earlier. So be aware of these like small changes to the deadlines, and make sure that all of your things are in by the deadline, unless it specifies that you can submit something later. One of the changes to the application deadlines this year is that Princeton is not doing any early action, early decision. So usually they will also have an early application round November 1st, but this year they have decided to completely scrap that, so you can only apply regular decision. I think otherwise, like most schools are still keeping with having an early round and a regular decision round. I don't think that this is going to change at this point, but just be aware of that. Cool. I think we've gone through everything there is. I just want to emphasize a couple of things that we talked about. The first thing is, if you can take a standardized test and it is not completely inhibiting to you or disadvantaging you in any way, take the test. It's such a good way for international students to showcase our abilities, and that we can do the same things as American students. Next thing is, keep up with the changing requirements and deadlines. While I said that I don't think there are going to be a lot of changes, we'll obviously try to keep you updated, but make sure that every single school that you apply to, that you know exactly what the requirements are and what the deadlines are. It would be such a shame for you to miss something and then your application is going to be marked incomplete. The third and last thing I'm going to say is, this application cycle is really weird, but it's also a chance for you to sort of think creatively about your application. So if I said as earlier, like if something has been canceled that you are really looking forward to talk about in your application, do something different. Write a different kind of application. Don't try to stand out a little bit. This year, a lot of people are not going to be submitting the standardized test, so the admissions offices are going to be looking at applications differently. And I don't even think that they know exactly how they're going to do that yet. So try to figure out a way for you to stand out. Okay, should we go to a Q&A? Alyssa, are you able to access that easily and read it out loud? I also got a question through email.
Actually, I don't think I have access to it.
Let me see. Okay, I see that there are some questions here in the chat. I'm sorry, it's just because I'm sharing my screen. Okay, we have one here from Mateus. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. About the test, how universities will evaluate my application without an American academic context? How will they know that I'm able to study in a rigorous core curriculum? Oof, that's a difficult question. So, I mean, this is an issue every year. Like, universities get applications from international students every year and accept a lot. So I don't think that is necessarily something that you should be worried about. I know from my own application and from some of my mentees, they always ask this question, like, how will they know to compare my grades and whether or not I did well? The universities get applications from all around the world, which means all different kinds of educational systems, schools. They are aware. They have lots of experience with all different kinds of systems. if there's something specifically you want to highlight about the rigorousness of your specific high school, for example, maybe ask your counselor or that counselor recommendation, whoever is writing that, to put that in that recommendation. So that way you make sure the university knows that, for example, you went to one of the most difficult high schools in your country without an American academic context. Like, I don't think that that's something that you should be worried about. As I said, like, they know each different system. So I don't think that should be a problem. Alyssa, do you want to add anything to that?
That's actually a difficult question, but I totally agree with Nina, because you submit all of your essays, all of your grades, you receive the letters of recommendation from the counselors. Plus, I believe that you have a section in the end of the Common App application where you can add whichever information you consider important for the admissions officers to know. And plus, they're all humans, meaning they understand that while it's usually more difficult for international students to apply to the United States colleges, during this application cycle, they're even more disadvantaged.
Yeah. One thing like about that as well, this is usually where the standardized test requirement comes in. So by, like, everybody has to take the SATs or the ACT. That is a way for universities to know that you have the same skills as an American student, and that's how they evaluate whether you can study in a rigorous core curriculum. However, since this year is different, obviously they won't have the ability to always compare across all students. However, I still think that what I said just a while ago is true. They do know each country's educational system. And I think that they might be weighing your grades and probably also like the soft sides of your application a bit more this year. There's another question here. Are my chances to get accepted lower if I need financial aid or a scholarship? And what ways of financing scholarships are there? This is a difficult question, especially because it varies across schools. So I don't have an overview of how each school evaluates international students, but I do know that some schools do look at the financial need of international students, which can affect your ability to get accepted. However, there are also a lot of schools that don't look at it. I think Harvard is one of them. I think they actually specifically say on the website that they are, that even for international students, that they are need blind. Alyssa, if you have anything to add here, this varies so much across schools. Just look for this like need blind for international students. I can't say that it's not going to affect your chances of getting accepted. But this is a bit of like a touchy subject because it is harder for international students, and the schools also, like to get their money.
I think, yeah, certain schools allow you to apply need blind, which means they don't actually know whether you'll need financial aid while you're applying. And once you get accepted, that's when they actually find out. Also, I think we'll be having more webinars on financial aid, scholarships, and how to build your financial aid profile later in the fall with like experts who've been specializing on like this specific part of the application. So I just encourage you to join those webinars and find out more.
Yeah, that's that's a great tip. In terms of like what ways of financing and scholarships, again, this varies so much across schools, but some schools will also have merit scholarships. Sometimes there are these like obscure scholarships. It's like if you have one parent from this country and one parent from this country, or if you have a heritage here, or if one of your parents work in this area or in this industry, there will be some sort of scholarship. Or if you did really well in the SATs, it varies so much that it's very difficult to say what you're going to get until after you've applied and gotten accepted. I always say to people, like, take the chance and apply and see what happens, because you just won't know. You just won't know what you're going to get. Maybe you're going to get a lot of what's called, like, financial aid, like need-based scholarship, or maybe you're going to get a full ride because your application was so amazing. It really depends on school, and sometimes scholarships also depends on what country you come from. So I can mostly speak to my own, which is Denmark. So we have a whole have a whole like database where you can search for scholarships for study abroad. I know this is something we're working on in Project Access to try to figure out how to get access to something similar in each country. But try to ask a representative in Project Access from your own country and see if there's something there. Also, I hustled my whole way through college and try to find scholarships in weird places. I, for example, won a scholarship by just entering my name and my passport information, and my name was drawn out of a hat, and I got $5,000. It was very weird. I didn't believe it when I first saw it, but money apparently appears out of nowhere sometimes. I think that's all the questions in the chat. Maybe we have one here in the Q&A. How do I access that? Maybe I stop sharing my screen and I can see it. Here, okay, I got it. I am a former exchange student. During my exchange year in high school, I was not required to take exams in my home school. How will I report my transcripts from that year? So just so I understand this question correctly, so if you had high school for like 4 years, you took your first year as an exchange abroad. So I did something similar, except for the fact that my high school didn't give me merit for that exchange year. So in Denmark, like, you finish primary school after 9th grade, and then you go on to high school. So between me finishing that and going to high school, I went on a yearly exchange to the US. So when I applied to US colleges, I actually submitted a transcript from that school. And I just contacted the high school in the US that I had gone to and asked them to submit the transcript for me. I don't know if that answers the questions. But perhaps write in the chat or in the Q&A if I didn't answer that question correctly. Otherwise, I'm sure that your counselor can put something in their recommendation or put it on the transcript that you were studying abroad that year and that you didn't take your exams. I'm sure that will be fine. The next one, is it harder to get into Ivy schools as an international student? I'm guessing they mean like, is it harder to get in as an international student as opposed to an American student? Alyssa, what do you think about that?
Well, I believe specifically for the Ivies, as they're private colleges, they do not actually have like lots of, like, they do not need to secure the places for local students as the UCs, for example. So most public state schools, they actually need to take like a certain number of local students, like though they would never officially say that. So for the Ivies, if they're private, that's not a huge problem for them. Also, most of them take pride in having like lots of really ambitious, talented international students. So sometimes they might even want more international students. So yeah, I think with the private schools, it shouldn't be such big of a problem. And like overall, the United States educational system is really outstanding because of the opportunities it provides for the international students. So international students really make a huge part of the US education.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. Honestly, like, yes, more American students get accepted than international students. So if you look at it that way, yes, your chances are lower. But all schools are looking to accept international students, and not as many international students apply as American students. So I think in that regards, like, your chances are going to be the same. Another question here: as a student who has finished school a month ago, is there anything important in comparison to applicants that still go to school, for example, about getting recommendations? I'm not sure I understand this question completely. Anything important in comparison to applicants that still go to school? Okay, I think I understand what you mean. So actually, a lot of Danish students apply to US universities after they've completed high school. I know that some people utilize that year to sort of like boost their application in a way, like, for example, like doing a cool project, getting a job, or doing like college classes, or something like that. So you definitely have an opportunity to do something extra that you can put on your application. But I think in terms of getting recommendations, you should still get your recommendations from the teachers that you had in high school. Because you are so newly out of high school, I would still use your teachers. Sometimes I think, for example, you pen, but Alyssa, if you have any opinions about this, like, please correct me. Some schools will allow you to submit like a third or a fourth recommendation that's not from a teacher. Usually they will say, like, we would like to see 2 recommendations from teachers that you've had. However, sometimes you can submit another one, which could be like a former employer, or someone who was your coach in basketball, or something similar like that.
Yes, I think that this thing exists. And I strongly suggest that if you have this person who knows you well, and who can speak more about your about you as a person, who can really reveal your personality, rather than just talking about your academics, then yes, you should actually ask for the recommendation letters. Because one of the major points for the admissions officers is that they do not only want to get to know your scores and what a good student you are, but you also want to get to know you as a person, your personality, your ambitions, your aims, etc.
Okay, let's there's just one more question that's popped up here. I'm an international student and my financial background requires me to study only if I get a full ride. Should I apply to Yale or Harvard, since they're NEET blind for internationals, but have an early acceptance rate of less than 10%, or to Columbia or Brown, since they're NEET aware, but have an acceptance rate of less than 20 in early action, early decision? Oh, it's such a difficult question. Alyssa, help me here. What would you do? I think I'm leaning more, like, is it because you really want to go to Columbia or Brown? Is that why that this is a big issue? I think I'm leaning more towards that you, like, if you really want to apply to something early action, early decision, then yes, maybe apply to Yale or Harvard if financials are such a big issue. I'm a little bit hesitant here because I believe that there are other ways of finding funding for schools. But if it's something that's really stressing you out and you really need that full ride and you don't want to deal with having having to deal with external scholarships and such, then yes, maybe apply to Yale and Harvard instead, because we know that they are need blind for international students. I would say then apply to Columbia and Brown regular decision. The difference between early and regular in terms of your chances of getting accepted are not that different. And I don't actually think it affects your financial aid and scholarships. Alyssa, do you know anything different than here? I guess like sometimes if you apply early, like obviously you show the school that you were really committed to them, and there might be a specific scholarship for you because you applied early. But honestly, I don't think that it's that big of a difference. So you can still apply to Columbia and Brown in regular decision and then still get scholarships from them or financial aid from them.
So I think first of all, you also need to look at the other variables, and the major one of them is which school you like best. And obviously, everything that Nina said is of importance. That's something you should really consider. However, I'm talking about like liking the school, because they will ask you in the essays, in the interviews, if you actually get the chance to have one. And this is like, if you really like the school, if you're really committed to them, this is something that will be readable between the lines. I don't really know how to explain this, but again, I believe that this is something that worked in my own case when I was applying. So do not underestimate this aspect. So like you really need to like feel the school, understand the spirit of this university, and like really be committed. Otherwise, no matter like how good you are in the academics, no matter how many extracurriculars you have, no matter like how good and long your essays are, there will be like, you know, this little thing that's lacking. It's like, you know, you look at the essay and it's really good, like your English is perfect, like you're talking about your experience, your challenge, like there is like this little thing that you cannot find in the essay, and this little thing is like your commitment to the school. So I think that like genuine interest in college is really important.
Yeah, no, that's good that you highlight that. Like if you're weighing like between some schools and you want to apply to something early, make sure that it really comes off like on your application that you are really committed to that school and that you know exactly why you're applying early. So there's another question here about English language abilities. My teachers do not have strong English skills. They wrote my recommendation letters in Portuguese. How can I translate that? Unfortunately, I don't know anyone that would translate my letters. I don't want to read my letters because I want to check the FERPA term on Common App. So I think that there are multiple ways of getting around this. If you have a mentor that's willing to help you translate it without you seeing, like if it's important for you not to see the letter, maybe you can send it to your mentor and have them help translate it. There are services that can translate that for you. They will cost money, so if that's a problem, maybe like find something else. If you are in a bind, I will translate it for you. I don't want this to be such a big problem. I know that for a lot of people, it's important to be able to check off on the Common App that you haven't seen the recommendation letter. There is also on the Project Access website in the Access Academy a whole document about how to deal with teacher recommendations with teachers that are uncomfortable with English. I would ask my mentor first and see if they would be willing to help, or if someone in Project Access would be willing to help with that. If you need a certified like a certified translation, then I think that you would need a professional company to do that for you. But hopefully we can find a solution for that, because I know that a lot of teachers are not comfortable writing in English. Can you ask your English teacher to translate the letters? That's you. That was your answer. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a really good tip. If you have an English teacher, then ask them to look at that recommendation. There was a lot of other questions, but Alyssa, I think that you answered them all, right? So if anyone wants us to expand on their question, or feel like we left something out, now is the time to ask. Alrighty. I think that might be the end then. Oh, sorry, I missed one here. There's a question here about whether or not I came from a Danish high school, like the national education system. Yes, I did. I went to a high school in Aarhus, which is the next biggest city in Denmark. Not well known to a lot of people, but that's okay. Yeah, so I went to a completely regular Danish high school, and they did not have any knowledge of applying to the US, or I don't think had ever had anyone do that. So I sort of had to guide them a little in how to write the recommendations and how to submit all the material. And they had a little bit of an issue, for example, like translating my transcript into English, which was required. But yeah, I went to a completely regular high school. There's another question here. Tax return needs certified translation, or I can do it myself. I don't know about that. You're asking because of financial aid, I'm guessing. If it says you need I would think that you would need a certified translation, but hopefully it tells you on the website. Alyssa, do you have experience with this? I was older when I applied, so I actually didn't submit any of my parents' income or anything like that. I'm sorry, I don't know. I know that some schools will want official certified translations of some of your documents, but I don't know the specific schools and their rules. Hopefully in the financial aid webinars that we'll have later, they will talk more about that.
I think for everything that concerns some documents like your school transcript, tax returns, like banking statements, all of them should be verified with a stamp and a signature.
Cool.
I even had ones on the letters of recommendation, though that's actually not required.
Good to know. Sorry, there was just a follow-up. So how did I translate my grades? I wasn't the one who did it. Honestly, I didn't know what I was doing when I was applying, and neither did my school. I think that they had some sort of list on how to translate the grade, because they did it for me. And I mean, because I didn't know any better, I was just fine with that. I think that there might be an official way to do it. And I even think that you can, if you get your transcript from your school in your native language and in your native grades, there are certain services that can translate that for you into American grades. I think, however, it's actually not necessary. And what I mean by that is obviously have the transcript like be in English, but have your grades still be in your native system.
I think you can
This,
also explain the system.
sorry?
You can also explain the system. Like, for example, we have a 5-grade system in my country, so it's like 2, 3, 4, 5, and like 1 is fail. So basically, I explain like 5 means excellent, 4 means good, etc.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that's what I also mentioned earlier. Like the schools have knowledge about the different educational systems. So, for example, if you're applying from Denmark, they will know that 12 is the highest grade. So sometimes it's just a little bit difficult to translate it directly to an American grade. I don't think it's necessary that you do that, but as Alyssa said, like make sure that there is some sort of explanation if there's room for that, but that the transcript itself is in English, but that you can keep the grades in the native grades. I hope that makes sense.
Also, I will be sharing in the group chats the document with all the deadlines, requirements for colleges soon, and I will also share the document on letters of recommendation. So don't worry about this.
Cool. Okay, so will you share the document from the Access Academy that we made? Cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so we're just gonna put that in the chat. Let me see if I can share my screen again, just so I can quickly show it to you. So this is the document. It has everything almost, I think, what we talked about today, probably except some of the questions, and you'll be able to see from, I think, most of the schools that you guys are interested in, whether or not all the different tests are optional, required, and there's a little section here to the right that says a little bit more about how to submit the scores. Obviously, like, this is our research. I can't be 100% sure that all of this is correct because sometimes they will change, but I think I did a pretty okay job. So I think you can use this. But it will be available on the website, and I think Alyssa's just put it in the chat. Okay, I just got a question more. If you want to stick around, we'll try to answer all the couple questions that are just coming in right now. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining. It has been really fun. I hope that you got something out of it, and I hope that I was very clear in my presentation. There are another document that I need beyond CSS profile and tax return to ask for financial aid. Again, sorry, I don't know, and I don't want to say anything that's not correct. This is not something that Project Access actually usually deals with because it is such a sensitive area, and I don't want to say something that's not true because it might hurt your chances of getting financial aid. It's something we're working on and getting experts in this area, but I am reluctant to say anything specific about it. And it's been a long time since I applied myself. Yes, I simply don't know. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm gonna give it one more minute for people to ask questions, and otherwise we're gonna stop. You're also welcome to ask questions about anything that's not related to the stuff we talked about today. We know that this process can be very confusing. And otherwise, you are always welcome to submit questions either to Project Access directly or to me and Alyssa. I'm sure that we're both very eager to answer any questions.
Yeah, you can always write in the group chat if you forget something by chance.
Also, I think my email is on the document.
It is.
Where did you share the link?
I will share it soon, really shortly.
Okay.
It will be in our group chats for the June class and the August class.
Ah, okay, great. Okay, if anyone is not in those channels or groups, then you can find it on the Project Access website. If you go to For Applicants Access Academy and you go down to the US section, you will find it under, I think it's like US admissions under COVID, and there's the entire document. Okay, I think this is it. Thank you so much for coming today. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too. And this has been recorded, so it will be available for you to always go back and take a look at later. I can repeat that again. This person is not in the group.
Let me actually post the link to the Access Academy website right now.
Like, so you'll put it in here.
Yeah. So
okay. So before we end, we'll put the link so you guys can access it. I'm just gonna stop the recording.